The next speaker is Fiona Reardon. She's involved with Animal Health Ireland, and is that the Centre for Veterinary Risk Analysis? Yeah. And we're going to hear about Trojans.
Yeah, and their role in the spread of BVD in the Irish eradication programme. So I have had help from UCD Severa, from Animal Health Ireland, from the Research Council, and from the Irish Cattle Breeders Federation. So just to give you a little bit of background, in 2012, as David said, there was a voluntary phase to the National Eradication Programme, and at that point it was estimated that the average losses to BVD were 102 million. And at a more local level, that for an individual farmer, buying in pregnant animals was going to increase his risk of having BVD on farm. And then in 2013, the compulsory programme started. And here in Ireland, it's based on tissue tagging of calves. So shortly after birth, every calf has a recorded status for BVD. So there's a couple of objectives to this study. To date, while we know that Trojan dams do play a role in the epidemiology of BVD, we don't know what the scope of that role is. So there's no published work quantifying how much of a role they play, and also we don't have any characteristics for them or for the farms on which they give birth. And just a point to make that anytime we're considering BVD or Trojan dams, we have to be cognizant of this window of susceptibility that occurs between the 1st and 4th month of gestation. So at this point, between day 30 to 120, if a naive pregnant dam comes in contact with BVD virus, she develops a transient infection, and the calf that she is carrying will become a persistently infected animal. So firstly, what we had to do was define what we were looking at, and a Trojan dam, therefore, is an animal who isn't herself persistently infected with BVD. She comes in contact with the virus and develops a PI calf. Subsequently, while still pregnant, she moves to another farm, and that's where she gives birth to this PI calf. And the study animals that we looked at, it was every calf that was positive for BVD born in Ireland between 2013 and 2015 and their dams. So this data was obtained from the programme database and from the Animal Identification and Movement System. Once we had this data on calves and their dams, it wasn't directly possible to identify them as Trojan or non-Trojan. We had to do some calculations. And to assist in this, we developed a decision tree. So looking at nearly 31,000 dams, we first asked, were they present in the birth herd for the entire duration of gestation? As if they were, they couldn't be Trojan. For dams then that moved into the birth herd during gestation, we asked, did they move in before day 30? If they moved in before this window of susceptibility, then they must have become transiently infected while in the birth herd, and therefore they're non-Trojan. Likewise, if they moved into the birth herd after day 120 of gestation, then they were carrying a PI calf when they entered the birth herd, and they are Trojan. After we'd filtered out dams this way, we were left with about 700 dams that entered during day 30 and 120 of gestation. So for these, we tried to find out where they were infected. If we could identify a source of infection in the birth herd and no source of infection in any of the source herds, then we considered that she was not a Trojan. If we could identify infection in the source herds but not the birth herd, we considered that she was a Trojan. And if we could identify either no source of infection or multiple sources, then we considered her to be a Trojan. So once we had identified dams as Trojan or non-Trojan, we could analyse them. And the outcome of interest in this analysis is whether she's Trojan or non-Trojan. We firstly did univariable analysis. So you can see there the factors that we looked at were region, herd type, year of birth, the herd size of the birth herd, dam parity, and the month the calf was born in. Also whether the dam calved in her own herd of origin. So she could have, say, moved out, been reared as a heifer somewhere else and then moved back into the herd where she was born, or she could have just moved on to any other herd. and also the import status of the dam. So in the end, the import status was the only one that wasn't significant. And building on that, then we did logistical regression. So we did 2 models for dairy herds, one where there was only 1 BVD positive birth in that herd in any given year, and one where there was more than 1 BVD positive birth. So doing 2 models like that allowed us to account for clustering within herds where there was more than 1 birth. So this shows the results that we got firstly at the herd level, and it's done year by year. So you can see there by herd type, you have the number of BVD positive calves, the number of herds with BVD positive calves. And then highlighted in blue, you have the percentage of these herds where some or all of those calves were to Trojan dams. And you can see that that's increasing year on year, particularly in dual purpose herds. And then after we've looked at them, we can look at where there was only Trojan birth, so where all of those BVD positive calves were to Trojan dams. And you can see there's a big difference between dairy and dual purpose herds in every year. And you can see that the trend is that Trojan dams are a larger percentage of a smaller number, which is what you would expect with BVD. Then these results are very similar, but they show it at the animal level. So of the 13,000 dams that gave birth to BVD positive calves in 2013, 7.2% of them were Trojan, 9.3 in 2014 and 8.5 in 2015. And again, what's quite striking is the difference between dairy and dual purpose herds, where only 5.9% of dams were Trojan in dairy herds, but 12% in dual purpose. And this just shows those same univariate results, giving a slightly different angle. So if you look at the parity of the dam, you can see that heifers were far more likely to give birth to a BVD positive animal, and also more likely to be Trojans. And it decreases year on year. And again, you can see the importance of herd type. So dual purpose herds, a greater percentage again are going to be Trojan, and the least is consistently in dairy herds. So we did logistical regression on dairy herds, and actually I can see there the parity of the dam, the odds ratio hasn't come up. If you take first parity as an odds ratio of 1, it's then 0.14 for second, 0.19 for third, and 0.14 again for fourth, in case you're wondering. And you can see what we did with them. So these we felt were very interesting results, and to discuss them, it's important to say that this is completely novel research. There's no other published data on Trojan dams or the role they play, and it's also really current research. So we have right up until the end of December 2015, drawn from the Irish programme. The theory was always that Trojan dams are an important part of the epidemiology of BVD, and we can confirm now that they do play a part, and it's 8.1% of all BVD plus births in the past 3 years were to Trojan dams. And not only does this help us quantify what's going on in Ireland, but it also provides a template for other countries who are embarking on an eradication programme that they can conduct similar research and see what issues they may have to deal with. And the epidemiological role of Trojans becomes really clear when you look at these results. Up to 20% of all herds have only Trojan births. So where there's any BVD, it can be traced back to a Trojan dam, and this figure is increasing yearly. And again, that is what you would expect in a BVD eradication programme, where primary trade in PI animals is stopped. It's these secondary routes that then become progressively more important. And this affects not just the herd where she calves, which is now going to have potentially a novel BVD outbreak, but it may also affect neighbours of that herd. And the risks associated with this birth will vary depending on what kind of a system is in place in the eradication programme. So here where we use tissue tag testing of calves, very shortly after birth, we will know that that calf is a PI and it can be disposed of. However, if you were doing serosurveillance, it may not be until the first young stock blood screen at approximately 9 months where this PI was identified. So there could be a far greater spread of infection associated with it. And a bit more background on what we found and how it fits in with the BVD picture, that the highest proportion of Trojan births were in the Midlands and lowest in the southwest, which fits in with the profile of our farmers. So in the southwest, that would be our greatest dairying region where the risks are lowest. And then in the Midlands, you would have a greater proportion of beef and dual purpose herds. So it does seem to make sense. And the risk, again, is greatest in small herds. So we think that that is because perhaps in dual purpose or beef herds where they would breed dams to terminal sires and sell on young stock, they need to have a greater proportion of replacement dams being bought in. And then again, this links into the risks associated with in-calf heifers. So they may be more likely to move and they may be more likely to be naive compared to older animals. And you can see in a small herd where they'd be likely to be buying in calf heifers as replacement stocks, that the risks are really building up for those farmers. It's only fair to say there was a number of challenges in conducting this research. So the main part of it was that we have only been recording BVD positive births on a national scale since 2013. And in 2013, then, there was a lot of animals on the database that didn't have a known BVD status, making it more difficult to trace back exactly where the dam may have encountered the virus that led to her transient infection. So certainly for, say, 2015, where we have 98% of animals accounted for with a BVD status, it becomes much easier to see exactly where she became infected. And going forward, this will be progressively easier. So this isn't the end of the road for what we're going to do with Trojan dams. Now that we have established the role that we play, it's to try and eliminate them as a source of infection within the programme. And how to do this most effectively without negatively impacting trade is the next kind of challenge. So we need more information on the herds where these dams are coming from. We now know about the herds where she gives birth. So where is she coming from and what are the trade patterns associated with those herds? Is it going to be easy to particularly target Trojan dams, or will we have to use a more blunt instrument? And this is what I'm doing research on at the moment. So some of the measures that we're considering really focus around movement restrictions, and then who do you restrict? So where there is a PI identified, do you restrict all female animals over a certain age, or do you restrict only pregnant female animals? And then who is going to certify that she's either pregnant or non-pregnant? And for how long will we restrict her? For 12 months after the last PI is eliminated, until she's past 120 days of gestation. So there's a couple of things that still need to be worked out going forward, and we hope to have results on that in due course.
Thank you very much. It's a really fascinating piece of work, this. It's not often that you get that detail coming out of these control programmes. And we've got a question from Dick just coming. Can I just ask you quickly, do you know how many potential moves that could have been Trojans? So like the denominator of the Trojans?
Yes, so there was about 1,200 dams that were coming in as Trojan, and in terms of movements then, about 25% of them only made one movement, but some dams made up to 7 movements. And in fact,
Yeah.
oh sorry, no.
No, it's the ones that could have been, that were moved in the, because that's your denominator for this, and then you can relate that back to the risky practices. Anyway, sorry, Dick, if you ask your question.
I think you may have just asked my question. I wanted to know what proportion. In fact, it was you, George, I think several years ago, said that the biggest risk if introducing BVD into a herd was to buy a pregnant heifer. So what proportion of pregnant heifers that are sold in Ireland are Trojans? You know that?
So we didn't have records on all the animals that were sold. We only had records on animals that were sold and then were BVD positive. So we can't say, well, this is the proportion of every heifer that is going to be producing a BVD positive calf. What we can say is that of BVD positive births, where they were to a heifer, 13% of them were Trojans. I don't know if that's anything.
Have we another question for Fiona? Yeah, we do. Gareth, could you make your way to the microphone, please?
Yeah, Gareth Aidley from UK. Just wondering whether you had any thoughts on what was going on the dual-purpose farms. Is that a function of size or trading patterns? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, both, we think. So they are likely to be smaller herds, and also, you know, they probably have a smaller number of, say, animals that they're fattening and selling on, and perhaps then buying in more replacement heifers for that. We don't have information on, say, dealer herds or exporter herds, but I think there may be a little bit of a link there as well. So certainly a function of size and trading pattern. Don't know how much of either one, but yeah.
Thanks.
If it's very quick.
Vesa Rainio, Finland. Why do you want keep on trading these pregnant heifers? I mean, why do you say you want to do something but not affect the trade of the animals? I mean, I love the idea of closed herds, so this is why I ask.
Well, I suppose again for those smaller herds where, say if you take a beef herd where their dams are all bred to maternal sires, commonly in Ireland they do buy in their replacement dams as breeding stock, they don't breed them themselves. So we do want to allow them to keep on buying in animals, but also with a certain degree of safety. So if it was possible to identify whether these pregnant heifers were coming from a farm that was going to be of a high risk, or whether it was possible to say, okay, no PIs have been identified here in the past 12 months, you're safe enough to buy from them, we consider that that would be more suitable in the Irish scheme.
Thanks very much, Fiona.
Thank you.